Good evening. An inquiry into the contaminated blood scandal has heard that medical professionals and government departments were in a coalition of secrecy. One witness revealed that his diagnosis of hepatitis C had been kept from him for nearly a decade.
Thousands of Scottish patients were infected with HIV and hepatitis C in what inquiry chairman Sir Brian Langstaff describes as the greatest treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. Kay Nicholson reports from the first day of the hearings in Edinburgh.
Griffiths regularly received blood products to treat his haemophilia. In the 1980s, he wanted reassurance after reports about infection risk. But he was told,
"We'd never ever use imported blood product in Scottish hospitals." This distressed me because I knew for a fact that for at least 10 years I had been receiving imported blood product. I had seen the labels on the sachets as I was being infused, labels of laboratories in Australia, labels of laboratories in America.
It later emerged he'd contracted hepatitis C, but it had been kept from him.
So they had actually known for over 9 years that I was hepatitis C positive. And he said, well, it's nothing to worry about. It's not life-threatening. It is only life-shortening.
He's recovered after a liver transplant, but questions and anger remain.
There was widespread fear of how bad this might prove to be. This led to a coalition of secrecy, I think, involving government departments, health service officials and indeed medical professionals.
Another witness who asked to remain anonymous was diagnosed with hepatitis C after having a blood transfusion as a teenager. He fought back tears as he described how the pain of the condition had led him to consider suicide. He said he still hadn't told his extended family about the illness because of the stigma attached to it. Today's witnesses are among more than 3,000 Scots to have been affected in the 1970s and 80s. The Penrose inquiry into Scottish cases was branded a whitewash. Patients and relatives hope this UK-wide inquiry will be different. This tribute to the hundreds who died and the design for a permanent Scottish memorial will be on display while the hearings run over the next fortnight. Kay Nicholson, STV News, Edinburgh.
Well, a man who contracted hepatitis C during the blood scandal when he was aged just 3 years old says he hopes the inquiry will finally bring justice and answers.
Bruce Norval is a haemophiliac and says the infected treatment he received as a child has impacted his whole life. Nicola McCalley reports.
I have never, ever known what it's like to be well in my life.
54-year-old Bruce Norval has had hepatitis C for most of his life. A haemophiliac, the blood plasma products he received from the NHS to supposedly improve his health, were in fact contaminated with deadly disease.
I didn't know what I was unwell from for a long period of time, but I was never well. My education suffered. I have never had full-time employment for more than a few years at a time. I have no pension. I have been benefits dependent for most of my adult life. The decisions my wife and I were able to make on what quality of housing we bought, decisions on holidays where I frequently didn't go on holiday to make it cheaper so that she could take the kids away, decisions on everything.
Bruce's own experiences have led him to campaigning for justice for all those affected for more than 30 years, during which time he's seen lots of friends die.
And I think it's important to remember that each one of us that's still alive, still talking to journalists, are actually standing on shoulders of dead men. Right, the work that's been done before us, the bits of understanding, etc., comes from people that are no longer with us, because if they were with us, they'd be sitting where I am. So when you say I've been campaigning for years, it's only because I lived.
It could take up to 5 years for infected blood inquiry findings to be reported. Time, a precious commodity those affected can ill afford. But they hope this will finally offer a chance for their stories to be properly told and what they deem as proper compensation to be made.
It is my hope that we will reach a broad understanding of what went on. Now, whether or not individuals who are culpable will ever be found, or we'll find out that most of the major players are actually all dead, we'll leave that to time. But what I'm hoping for all victims is that we can reach a point where we get a story that has a credible narrative, that fits with the reality of individuals' lives, and that we have a government at the end of it that not only agrees to compensate victims, but agrees to support memorial funds for each corner of Britain, so that people have a focus for grief and they also have an assurance that their relatives' lives will not be lost to history.
Nicola McCally, STV News.